When a child loses his parent, they are called an orphan. When a spouse loses their partner, they are called a widow or widower. But when a parent loses their child, there isn't a word to describe them. And I just kind of got chills again, and I've read that probably hundreds of times. So his proclamation acknowledged the silent grief that I certainly experienced and that so many families carry. And it was the first calling for greater compassion and awareness. One of my favorite images is of Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. And they're just kind of sitting on a log together. And one says to the other, you don't want to talk? That's okay. I'll just sit here with you. And sometimes that's what grief is about. Just acknowledging and validating it's hard, but you're not alone.
Welcome to the WingSpace Podcast, a place to take up space, where we talk about all things wellness, from nutrition to movement to sleep and stress, and so much more. With me, your host, Jennifer Voorhaar, along with special guests and experts within our Hope and Healing wellness community. Let's jump in.
This podcast is not a replacement for mental health treatment or professional health care. In case of crisis or emergency, please contact your local healthcare provider or dial 911.
Hey there, and welcome to the WingSpace Podcast, a place to take up space. I am your host, Jennifer Voorhaar, and I am honored to have with me today a fellow therapist and an expert in the world of grief and loss, Sherrye Urtz. It's good to have you with me today, Sheri.
Thank you so much for having me.
And in today's episode, Sheri and I are going to be talking about infant loss awareness. And the title of our podcast, as you may have seen, is Honoring Tiny Lives, Holding Big Feelings. So, Sheri, would you mind just introducing yourself for listeners who may not have heard you on the podcast before we jump into the content today?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Sherrye Urtz. I am a local LCPC here in the St. Mary's County area. I have been doing grief as therapy probably for about 11 years and kind of in a support capacity for, I guess, 17 now. I'm a certified compassionate bereavement care specialist, and that certification is through the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the Miss Foundation organizations.
And Sheri, you gave two different timelines in terms of 11 years that you have been doing this professionally, but 17 doing so in a support capacity. Can you share a little bit about how that 17-year mark entered you into this journey and kind of evolved into being a provider?
Yes, thank you for asking. I was going to share a little personal reflection, but it fits perfectly right now. So about 17 and a half years ago or so, I became a bereaved mom when we received a fatal diagnosis. Our daughter was diagnosed with trisomy 13. I was blessed to be able to carry her to term and have a short time with her after birth. But after experiencing that, well, one, the anticipatory loss, and then two, certainly the actual loss, at least in this geographical area, the resources were so limited. It's still kind of a taboo topic, but we've made a lot of progress. Talking about it just was, like I said, it was taboo. It was hard to find support. It was hard to feel comfortable. And really, I realized very quickly a need that I had was to find a way to normalize and validate those kinds of conversations. And so that happened just through support for 5 or 6 years until I had the proper training and practice to do it more professionally and to be far enough removed from it on a personal level to be able to put my heart out there for others.
Absolutely. So certainly when we talk today and we're talking about honoring those tiny little lives, faith is one of those that we will honor.
Thank you.
So we are going to be publishing this episode during the month of October. We are recording it a little bit sooner than that, but publishing it during the month of October, which is Infant Loss Awareness Month. Can you tell us a little bit about what the intention of that awareness month is?
Yeah, I have some notes here that I'm going to kind of refer to about the actual proclamation, so to speak, of Infant Loss Awareness Month. So a little bit about the history. Infant Loss Awareness Month was officially proclaimed in October 1988, believe it or not. I certainly didn't know about it in 1988. And it was President Ronald Reagan that proclaimed that month. His proclamation, it rings so true. And what he said, what was on the actual signed proclamation is, when a child loses his parent, they are called an orphan. When a spouse loses their partner, they are called a widow or widower. But when a parent loses their child, there isn't a word to describe them. And I just kind of got chills again, and I've read that probably hundreds of times. So his proclamation acknowledged the silent grief that I certainly experienced and that so many families carry. And it was the first calling for greater compassion and awareness. And then, several years later, it was actually October 15th was proclaimed internationally Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day. So a lot of times you'll hear a lot about something which is called an International Wave of Light on October 15th. And for those of us who participate, we just ask everybody, to light a candle in their time zone, and therefore it's the wave of light, because the wave will essentially go for 24 hours. So just one day in October that hopefully helps everybody to reflect and remind everyone that even in grief, we're not alone anymore.
Well, and you mentioned the idea that bereaved parents are grieving in silence sometimes, and they're really carrying such a weight, such an emotional weight, that the community around them often doesn't know how to support them.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. We've all lost somebody that we love. We have all gone through that. Maybe even the 10th time you go through it. We're not trained. There's no class in elementary school that tells you what to say or how to respond. And so even as professionals, we don't necessarily, all grief is different, right? What to say to people and how to be with them. One of my favorite images is of Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. And they're just kind of sitting on a log together. And one says to the other, you don't want to talk? That's okay. I'll just sit here with you. And sometimes that's what grief is about. Just acknowledging and validating. It's hard, but you're not alone. I see you. I hear your silence, and I want you to know that I want to be with you.
Sometimes just that presence alone is really all that people need.
100%. Yes.
So for those folks that are listening who might be asking themselves, what is infant loss anyway? Can you share with us how that is defined? What encompasses that category?
A lot of things encompass that. So infant loss includes miscarriage, and miscarriage can be at any point in development. It includes stillbirth that the mom will then need to deliver. And it also includes the death. So for instance, Faith is considered an infant death. It's the death of a baby shortly after birth. And they have periodically changed what shortly after birth means. So I'm just going to kind of leave it, the first few days, the first month, that's all included in infant loss. And again, they're personal, and they're often so invisible, especially miscarriage and early miscarriage. That is something that many women carry in silence.
Well, there's so many women who choose not to share about their pregnancy until later in their term. And then if they have a miscarriage, they haven't told anyone they were expecting. So now how do I tell people that I had a miscarriage? And so they and their partner, hopefully their partner, they can grieve together, but they are grieving, and we really need to normalize that for moms.
100%. Yeah. And dads too. And there's another part of that where with every child loss, regardless of age, but also with infants is, think about it. For each of us in, any pregnancy, most of us start to plan a nursery. We buy blankets and clothes. And so parents grieve that immediate loss, but also the future that will never come to be, whether it's walking out of the hospital with a baby in your arm or the first step, the first word, the first anything. And like I said, I mean, that it doesn't matter if a child is in their 50s, parents are still going to, grieve what they don't get. But the future that never was is really a hard emotional component with infant loss. So not that it's super important, but that's something that we call disenfranchised loss, just the grief that isn't fully recognized or validated. Friends are gonna reach out and tell you how heartbreaking it is. But, when all of their kids are going off to kindergarten at 5, it's not and it shouldn't be rolling in their heads because it's not their norm. But that disenfranchised grief, that disenfranchised loss stays with parents, honestly, for a lifetime. Comes and goes in waves, just like any kind of grief.
Yeah. One of my very dear friends became pregnant just a few weeks before I was pregnant with our oldest son, and she unfortunately had a miscarriage. And so we were just talking about this the other day. He is a reminder to
Yeah.
her of what she lost. And, she subsequently had 2 beautiful children, and, I love them like my own. But he is kind of that unexpected reminder of what did not come to be for her.
Hmm.
And
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 that
I
can
imagine
be,
people often outside of that forget that.
yeah, that can be, well, one of my favorite words in grief is bittersweet. That can be bittersweet. It can be so painful, but so beautiful as well, because I'm going to guess that she looks at your children the same way you look at hers. And that's the beauty. And it's also the beauty of remembering. Yes, it's painful to remember that loss every time you see, a child or a young adult at this point in time, who your baby would be the same age as, but also so sweet because every time you see them, you are thinking about your baby, you are remembering, and that's a way of honoring um,
Absolutely.
our loss.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and
bittersweet.
she and Connor have a very special relationship too, and I can only imagine that it's because of that and him connecting her. So, we can openly talk about this, as therapists, and not all therapists are comfortable talking about
That's
grief.
right.
So I don't want to make that assumption and tell the world that every therapist is, because we all have our places where we're comfortable. But certainly the community is not always comfortable having conversations. But it is important that we bring awareness to this issue and we talk about it and we share compassion and comfort to those around us.
Right, right. Grief grief after an infant, grief after any loss is complex. Let's be real. I know we're kind of putting it, especially for October in the infant loss box, but it can include any emotion, right? Sorrow, guilt, anger, confusion, even numbness. And it's not that anybody out there in society should feel like they have to speak on every one of those things, but more kind of like Winnie the Pooh and Tigger, but just to be able to sit there and say, I can only imagine how difficult this is for you. We do have more resources in our geographical area now than we have before. But again, it's not like you drive down the road and see, big signs for them. It's not a beer commercial, right? But we do have resources, some of which are faith-based, some of which are not. And most welcome everybody regardless of faith anyway. I always like to put a plug in for hospice. Most people think of hospice as, they care for just terminally ill, which they do a fabulous job at, but they also have a bereavement component. And I can say again, 17 plus years ago, I utilized their resource, and they're really good at being able to provide that when others in the area don't necessarily have that. They're really good at validating what you're doing is enough as a
Yeah.
parent, as a griever, even when there's nothing else that we could have done, and in infant loss, especially, stillbirth, miscarriage, that's your body. You have no
Mhm.
control
Right.
over that. So really being able to normalize the guilt and help people to let that go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with any kind of loss, people sometimes you mentioned we're not trained in elementary school how to respond, but sometimes people say less than helpful comments. And I find sometimes with miscarriage, it tends to be much less helpful than in other situations. And sometimes that complicates things even more and just makes it harder to find support because, well, I know that I can't talk to that person. And, you kind of tick people off the list because of unhelpful comments as
Right.
people navigate that emotional landscape of what it is from their throughout their lifetime. Because I do not know that loss, but I imagine that it does change and shift over time.
Right. There's a term called ambiguous loss. And that term just it basically describes grief without closure.
Mhm.
So, as a for instance, especially with miscarriage and with stillbirth. So, a baby that is not born live or a fetus that is not born live, but we're not going to get into those technical things. Um, that that can be very ambiguous because the baby doesn't have a birth certificate in those instances. So not only are you leaving the hospital without a baby in your arm, you're leaving the hospital without a birth certificate. And in some instances, either the parents haven't thought about a name or just weren't given the opportunity. And a birth certificate helps to I don't like the word closure as a grief therapist, but a birth certificate kind of helps to make that more real, if you will, and more validating of, look, I really do have reason to grieve. So when the baby doesn't have that, sometimes parents, right, there's that guilt, there's that ambiguity. They don't have a physical, something physical to grieve, but the love is real. That doesn't change it. It doesn't matter if it was, 8 weeks of a pregnancy, or 26 weeks in. The love was real. And the love deserves to be honored. And that's what I like to tell people when that I'm working specifically in infant loss. Grief is a sign, right? Again, at any point in time, grief is a sign of our love. There wouldn't be grief if we didn't care or love about the individual. Now, that doesn't make it easier, but it does mean that that individual deserves to be honored in whatever way is appropriate for you as the loved one.
Mhm. So how can people walk through the healing, but also making meaning of their circumstances?
So making meaning, again, I won't get into like the absolute specifics, but in any grief work, we really kind of work through the tasks or the needs of mourning, right? And it's not linear because grief is not linear. So we could go from here to, here and back. But I used to say the last, and it's really not the last because just because you make meaning doesn't mean that you're not going to go back to, sadness and depression again. But what is the sixth task of mourning is making meaning of it. What does that mean? That means we know we can't change what happened, but finding a way, the bittersweet, it's the sweet part of the bitter, finding a way to, for me, it was being able to validate and help other people know they're not alone. Finding a way to make sense of what will never make sense, right? And it's not the same for any two people, and that's okay. People start nonprofit foundations. I've worked with somebody who every year on their child's birthday, they make goodies and bring them to first responders. The meaning really is in helping others, right? So the task is for us as individuals to learn how to ask for help, to be that, Pooh and Tigger just sitting there saying, sit with me, to learn how to ask for it and to give it back, whatever that might look like. It could just
Mhm.
be being, Pooh on the post. It could be taking stuff to first responders. It could be being a therapist, but being able to give back is essentially what we're looking for in that meaning because we're never going to know the why. I mean, our body failed us. That's the why, but we're not going to know. essentially what caused it. Healing doesn't mean forgetting.
Mm, yeah.
Doesn't matter if it's 6 months, 6 years, or 60 years. No mom and dad are ever going to forget their child's birth date or the day they were supposed to be born or the day they died. So it's really important to differentiate those. I always have people ask me, well, when am I going to stop thinking about it?
Mhm.
And my response is, I hope never, because we don't want to forget. We want to integrate.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing treats to first responders, that's integrating. That's
Yeah.
saying thank you for what you do. Thank you for being there for me. I have a couple of friends who became foster parents. Like, they just wanted the love that they had for their baby, they wanted to share
Mm-hmm.
by helping other kids. It doesn't have to be that profound, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might be. I've had a friend who just said, I'm going to focus on my other child. I'm going to be the best mom I can be to my other child. That's profound too.
Mm-hmm.
All of those are finding ways to make meaning. But in order to make the meaning, you have to go through that healing process. And I wish I could say it was 6 months. I wish I could say it was a year. But again, we're all different. And so, some of us may feel angry for longer than others. Some of us might not ever feel angry. Some of us get stuck in that sadness and depression. And it's no therapist's job to push you through it, but just to be your poo and sit with you,
Mm-hmm.
validate you through it.
Well, and this podcast isn't an overarching grief podcast, but I think this is just a good time to tell our listeners that you touched on it briefly, and that is grief is an individual experience, and however you feel is okay. And however you go through that is okay. And two people can go through the same loss, and one is angry right away and one is sad right away, and they go through different stages at different times and for different periods of time, and all of that is okay. And
Right.
it's I love what you said about, the size of our grief, or the impact of our grief is really about the impact of that love that we had. And if we didn't have that love, we wouldn't have that grief. So honoring that relationship that gave us such profound love.
Healing is finding ways to carry the love forward, right?
Mm.
Again, one of my own kind of favorite terms is remembering with joy. It's so common that, especially in the short term, remembering is painful, right? We
Yeah.
cry, we miss, we long. And so remembering with joy going is part of going, as we go through the healing process, the more, I can talk about my daughter now and giving her a bath, and it brings me joy. But for months, if not years, it was so painful, right? Because of that disenfranchised loss, because of that, I wasn't going to be able to do it again. Finding ways to carry the love forward. And, again, not just for infant loss, but for all grief, gentle strategies like creating rituals. Okay. Rituals are for survivors. They are not for the ones that we've lost. Like funerals, lighting a candle, whether it's the International Wave of Light or a holiday or the baby's birthday. For faith-based people, most churches have a place where you can light a memorial candle. Planting a tree, like that's so. In my own yard, we have a faith tree, right? And I used to laugh and say, if we move, I'm digging it up. Well, when it gets to be 20 feet, you're probably not going to dig it up, but that's okay because you can plant another one. Storytelling, right? Whether the life was a life that was in utero only, or a few short hours or a few short days, you still have stories to tell. And that is a very ritualistic way to honor your grief, but also to carry the love forward. Because every time we share that story with somebody, grief needs to be witnessed, right? Every time we share it with somebody, that somebody is getting to know our baby, our child.
Well, and for those of you that are listening who have not experienced an infant loss, this message is for you, in that let your loved ones share their stories. Let them talk
Yes.
about that tiny little child that they carried for however period of time they carried that child, and for however long that child lived here on earth. Let them tell those stories, let them share, because that is a part of carrying that memory on and a part of their healing.
Yes, it is 100%. Just being there, knowing that listening to the story is you are contributing to the healing process
Mhm.
just by doing that. And for people who, especially with miscarriage, who have saved it inside themselves for so long, I urge them, who do you trust most in your life? And share that. Share it with one person. You don't have to start big. You don't have to do a podcast. Share it with one person because that's how the healing starts.
Yeah. And I love the way that the concept of a rainbow baby has come about, because someone may not have shared that they had a miscarriage, but then they talk about having a rainbow baby, which then gives opportunity for us to say, you know,
Yes.
I'm so sorry for your loss, and how can I help you to honor this baby that you lost while still loving this little person that's here with us. It honors the loss in a way that I think is really beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah, and they've come so far with rainbow baby photo shoots. If you can imagine it, it is out there and beautiful.
Yeah,
And it's a way of honoring, remembering, but also looking like, hey, finding meaning. Sometimes another baby is meaning.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that this might be a good time for us to invite our listeners to find a way to honor their loss. Or some of you may be listening to this and you know someone that would benefit from this message. So, first share the message with them, share the podcast with them, but then maybe walk with them as they find a way to honor the loss.
Yeah, for sure. For sure during October, but I'm going to even put another little plug in there for October 15th. Whether it's your own loss or someone else's that you are walking with and trying to support, take a moment, light a candle. Oh my goodness, take a picture, or social media, everybody's social media created. Take a picture of that candle that you lit, whether it's for a tiny baby that you know and loved, or maybe it's just for all the tiny the tiny feet out there, and you're just kind of showing your support. Take a picture and put it out there. It touches people in such a way, just to know that someone cares enough to learn about the awareness and to partake. So whether it's someone you know, or you just want to be, part of the healing process, it's so supportive, and it helps all of us out there, whether we're going through it or walking through it with someone, to know we're not alone. Our grief matters, and love truly does endure, even though sometimes it's bitter and sometimes it's sweet.
Such a great message to close us out there, Sheri. I'm going to repeat that. You were kind enough to give me some notes so I can share it just as it's quoted. You are not alone. Your grief matters and your love endures. What a wonderful message to end today. I appreciate you joining me, Sheri. We, as mental health providers, have worked really hard to reduce stigma around folks seeking therapy for any reason.
Yes.
And this truly is one of those reasons that folks can seek therapy. They can certainly reach out to you, and we'll make sure that your contact information is available. They can reach out to those other resources as well. And it's okay to need that extra support. It can also be a way to honor the profoundness of the love that you had for that little person.
Yeah. It's okay to need permission. We'll give it.
We give
We'll
it,
give you
absolutely.
permission for
You
that.
have permission for sure.
Yes.
Well, thanks again, Sheri, for joining me today. Listeners, I appreciate you listening. I know this is a heavy topic, but it's something that we have to talk about. And we do truly want to honor those little lives and give space for the big feelings that we have around losses in this way. So again, if you are thinking of someone who might benefit from this message, go ahead and share that with them. And I hope that they will find a little nugget to help them through their journey of healing. So thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.
Thanks.